Shabbat Shalom. You know, yesterday was Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th. There have been books, movies, scary stories about Friday the 13th. But the other biggie within the couple of months is Halloween. But today's story is not about Mike Myers or Jason. Friday the 13th has long been considered a harbinger of bad luck. Friday the 13th has inspired a late 19th century secret society, by the way, of which 4 presidents were members, including Teddy Roosevelt. An early 20th century novel, and a horror film franchise. And just like walking under a ladder, crossing paths with a black cat, or breaking a mirror, many people hold fast to the belief that Friday the 13th brings bad luck. Even within the believing community, even within the body of Messiah, there is superstitions. And though it's uncertain exactly when this particular tradition began, negative superstitions have swirled around the number 13 for centuries. In fact, in the apartment building where I live, there's no 13th floor. The elevator has buttons from L through 12 and then from 14 and up, but there's no 13. And while Western cultures have historically associated the number 12 with completeness, such as the 12 months of the year, the 12-hour clock, the 12 tribes of Israel, just to name a few, a successor, 13, has long history as a sign of bad luck. According to biblical tradition, 13 guests attended the last Seder of Messiah, also known as the Last Supper, Yeshua and his 12. It's believed by some to have given rise to a long-standing Christian tradition or superstition that having 13 guests at a table was a bad omen, specifically that it was courting death. Never have the number 13 at the table. Also, as Christianity believes that the Messiah was crucified on a Friday, and we're not going to get into those misgivings today, and that Adam and Eve sinned and were cast out of Eden on a Friday. Boy, they must have a long calendar. And that Cain killed his brother Abel on Friday. And it was Friday the 13th and all these dates. Interesting. This all adds up to superstitions, though not facts. But it has at least a plausible understanding of why Friday the 13th is considered a bad luck day. A more pagan and evil festival is Halloween, which is just over 2 months from now. Large stores such as Costco and Walmart already have Halloween costumes on sale for the kids. October 31st is also the day on which other significant events have taken place. In 1938, on October 31st, Halloween, Orson Welles broadcast his famous War of the Worlds. This broadcast caused much of the United States, the people, to be panicked by the possibility that Mars was invading the world. Wow. Because it came over like a newscast. It was actually a story. People were fleeing their homes. Also, in 1926, on October 31st, the great illusionist and escape artist Houdini died on that date. But as significant as those events in history have been, it's still known as the day of Halloween, All Hallows Eve. It is a pervasive holiday. In fact, Halloween has become something of a de facto, if not de jure, a national holiday in the United States. During that time of year, our children can hardly get away from it. It's part of almost all their cartoons. It's included in nearly all the shows they might watch. It's advertised excessively, and not only on TV, but also at CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, the local grocery store. Kids from the neighborhood traipse up and down the street collecting candy and wearing all kinds of outfits ranging from superheroes to vampires. But there is a very dark side to the holiday. A&E had an hour-long program describing the pagan background for much of the activities that traditionally are part of decorations and activities on Halloween. A lot of kids dress up like cult figures, demons, witches, ghouls, goblins, werewolves. It's hard to know which way is up. W-I-T-C-H. Which way is up? Many of the TV programs and movies at the time of year focus on death and dismemberment in the most horrid of ways. And it is because of this dark side of Halloween that my son Daniel has never gone trick-or-treating. But Friday the 13th and Halloween also give me an excellent opportunity to talk about something a whole lot more dangerous than letting your kids go trick-or-treating. And by the way, while I'm there is one Jewish advantage or messianic advantage to Halloween, is to wait for the next day when all the costumes that didn't sell go on sale. Then we can buy something that's not ghoulish, but maybe a princess, maybe something that looks like it could be Queen Esther or Mordecai or something like this, and then you could have costumes for Purim, which is much more of a biblical holiday tradition and not an evil one. But as dark and distasteful as Halloween can be, and Friday the 13th, they only come, generally speaking, once a year. The topic I'm going to be discussing today has far more insidious effect on people because it is embraced by many Americans every day of the year. I'm talking about the occult. In one survey of 1,700 teens, it was found that 25%, that's 1 out of 4, high schoolers admitted to having used Ouija boards. 1 out of every 5, 19%, had used astrology or their horoscope to learn about their own future. 11%, 1 out of every 10, for example, had had their palms read. Hollywood, always on the lookout for a way to push the envelope, as well as looking for ways of tapping into a new marketing group, has begun to introduce TV shows with a renewed passion and that focus on the occult. Certain talk shows have fortune tellers as regular visitors. There were numerous shows dealing with channeling and speaking to the dead. Some years ago, there was a big show called Crossing Over, and where the host claimed he could speak to the dead. Mediums and those who speak to ghosts became popular with shows like Medium and Ghost Whisperers. Other shows tried to make witchcraft look acceptable, normal. Charmed, for example, the TV show Charmed was an extremely popular show 15 to 20 years back. It was rebooted in 2018 with the same name and a new cast. And then from 04 to 06, there was a child-oriented wickedness cartoon called Witch. And this doesn't even begin to cover the movies and video games that promote the occult. And now that said, we need to realize something. These are the kind of entertainments and activities that one should expect in a pagan world. The people who produce these shows don't really care if God is pleased or not. Let's everybody mask up, please. In fact, I suspect many of these shows are deliberate efforts to thumb noses at religious people in the hopes of making them mad, or worse, trying to turn God followers into pagans. In addition to the people who create these displays of paganism are also driven by profit. It's all about making money. Why else do stores stock entire aisles of candy and costumes before Halloween to sell candy, to give away little costumes, masks, all kind of things, everything from drugstores to supermarkets, you walk in, they have the spiders' webs and the spiders and the skeletons and things like this. It's driven by profit. They are attempting to tap into a market that wants to experience the promised power and mysticism of the occult. And that is what we should expect from a pagan culture. But we who are Yeshuim, that is followers of the Messiah, Yeshua, must not have contact with these things. We mustn't have contact with these things. Let's look at Deuteronomy 18, verses 10 to 12. You may have heard this read earlier. It says, "There must not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through a fire, or a fortune teller, soothsayer, omen reader, or sorcerer, or one who casts spells, or medium, or spiritist, or one who calls up the dead, for whoever does these things is an abomination to Adonai." But one may ask, what's so wrong with these activities? The most basic reason is, it ticks God off. These things are detestable to the Lord. They are an abomination to Adonai. Deuteronomy tells us that God was literally kicking entire nations out of their homelands because they engaged in this type of disgusting behavior. Seems a little drastic though, doesn't it? I mean, all those people were doing was pursuing some harmless entertainment. What's the big idea? What's the big deal? Just because something is disgusting doesn't warrant that kind of response, does it? I mean, somebody has apple pie and ice cream and pours ketchup all over it. It would make disgust some other people, but it's no reason to kick them out of the country. Years ago, there was a news report, it's a true story, a news report about a man who was upset with a local grocery store. Had a feud going on with him. He was so angry. This took place in the United States. I'm not going to mention the state it happened in. It was somewhere in the middle of the country. And this man was so angry that he dried out some manure and he turned it into fine powder using a cheese grater. They caught this on tape, by the way. It was in the news. He entered the grocery store, went to the pastry section, and sprinkled his treat on the donuts and pastries there. It was revealed that he did this for 7 months before they caught him. Patrons routinely complained about the smell and, yes, the taste of the pastries. People actually ate those donuts. Finally, officials at the store began to suspect something foul was afoot and caught the man on tape. And brought up before the court, the man argued that he only meant it as a joke. Apparently, the legal system wasn't laughing very much because he was sentenced to 5 years in jail and a $3,000 fine. And I believe if they could have, they had given him a far stiffer sentence. Now, do you think this behavior was disgusting? Yes, it was. Do you think the pastries would have tasted bad? Absolutely. Do you think they would have smelled bad? For sure. Would it have turned your stomach to have bit into one of those donuts and then found out what this man had done? Sprinkled powdered manure on it, which is horse droppings, for those of you who don't know country jargon. You see, what God is telling people here in Parsha Shoftim is that when his people engage in this kind of behavior, it creates a foul taste in his mouth, a stench in his nostrils. It's enough to turn his stomach. Deuteronomy 18 is the same chapter in the Torah where God introduces the Messiah. He said right after where we're reading, just a little bit after where we're reading in Deuteronomy 18 from verses 10 to 12, around there. Just after that, God says, Moses says, the Lord will raise up from among your brothers a prophet like me. He's going to raise up a prophet like me, and listen to him. So this is an inkling. This is a line to that the Messiah was coming. The same chapter, But before God can introduce the Messiah, he has to say, whatever you do, you better stay away from this. Because if you're invested in that, you're never going to get him. You see, I was thinking, what gets God so angry about the occult? What gets him so upset, so angry, so enraged? And I realized it's a form of faith. It's a form of belief. It's a belief in some power or force other than our God. Someone or something other than our Creator. Witchcraft, fortune-telling, consulting the dead. People who engage in these activities are looking to gain control of their lives from the forces other than God. Whenever a person goes into a fortune teller, or consults a Ouija board, or a horoscope, or seeks the help of a medium or witch, they're telling God, hey, I want help that you just can't supply. And they bow down at the altar of paganism because they turned their back on God. Leviticus 19, verse 31 teaches this. Do not turn to spirit mediums or sorcerers. Don't seek them out to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. And Isaiah chapter 8, verse 19, Adonai tells us, so when they tell you to consult those squeaking, squawking mediums and fortune tellers, you are to answer, shouldn't a people seek their God? Must the living ask the dead? That's what it says. Isaiah 8, verse 19. Adonai is a jealous God. And it is offensive to him for his people to seek help from pagan sources. You know, such activities are almost always powered by demonic forces. It's true. Most of those who offer to read your fortune or put together horoscopes are charlatans. They're playing you. They're telling you what you want to hear in order to get your money. And so the true account, there was once an account of a woman, this is from Reader's Digest, who had been a sideshow palm reader. She did this for a trade, for a living. And she said that she could have read your foot as easily as she read your palm. It was all fake. And she said in the article, quoting her, I closely observed the way people entered the tent, their clothes, their manner, the initial remarks, the texture of their hands, whether they had known manual work. Faces were most revealing. There were sulky, bad-tempered faces and faces that reflected a happy disposition. Eyes that indicated assent or denial, expressed fear and concealment. It paid to tell every third person that his hand was unique. It softened him up, and he told me more about himself. I then repeated it back in different words. Professional fortune tellers all learned the law of average incidence. For instance, practically everyone falls in love, has quarrels, reconciliation, spends unwisely, and meets dark, attractive strangers. Nearly every teenager has had a disagreement with a sweetheart and longs to travel. Tell them any of these things and you will be right by the law of average incidence. Fortune tellers also use a technique called strong pointing, making a statement and elaborating on it or contradicting it according to the expression it brings on the face of the client. An old pro once told me he had a small hole in the side of his tent through which he could see if the client entering had anyone waiting outside. Some of his other tricks of the trade: tell young men they were attractive to girls, tell small town girls they will eventually work in the city, tell an aged woman she has a wonderful son, and tell all discontented women that they will shortly have fights with their husbands. Reader's Digest, 1085, page 84. There are a lot of crooks out there. But there was a man named Alexander who was a believer, and he came out of the occult. And he told those in his congregation that the spirit world is real. He said he personally took part in many seances, channelings, and spiritist activities. He says there are mediums and there are channelers, and there are people who have familiar spirits who are literally talking to someone or something that literally exists. But they're not talking to the dead, he said. And he was in the occult for many years. He says they're working knowingly or unknowingly with demonic forces. They're not talking to the dead. They're talking to demons. Consider the story from Acts chapter 16. Maybe you'd like to turn there. Acts chapter 16. And it tells the story of a slave girl, a fortune teller, who followed Paul and Silas around proclaiming these words. She was saying, "These are the servants of the Most High God. These are the servants of the Most High God. These are the servants of the Most High God." Well, she must have been something of a pest, because Paul finally turned around and spoke to the spirit that dwelt within her. He said in Acts 16, verse 18, "In the name of Yeshua the Messiah, I order you to come out of her." And the spirit did come out of her at that very moment. Her owners became angry because she could no longer tell fortunes. They had lost the income they gained from her because she was so effective in telling people's fortunes. You see, there it is, plainly in front of your own eyes. You can forget about stories on the news, Reader's Digest, what you saw in a magazine, what you heard from somebody, or what was in some movie. Right there in the New Covenant, in the book of Acts, in chapter 16, is one of several stories of somebody who had an unclean spirit, a demon, that was giving them the information. They weren't talking to a dead. It wasn't a crystal ball. It was a demon giving them the information. That slave girl had literally been demon-possessed. What that story in Acts 16 tells us is that there are people who can tell your future. They can, accurately. But they're not getting their information from some dead relative. They're talking to demons, and that makes absolute sense. Because if you're not getting your knowledge about the future from God and his angels, who else is going to supply the information? I'm sure you've heard the expression, the devil knows the Bible too. You know, because these activities with the occult are demonic, they often create fear. Remember, fear is one of the tools of the adversary, because God did not give us a spirit of fear. God did not give us a spirit of fear. But the adversary feeds on it. He uses it. It's a tool. A man once consulted a fortune teller, and the woman told him that he would have 4 children, and he did. She predicted that he'd have 2 daughters and 2 sons, and he did. She informed him that he would have a home by the water, and he bought a cabin court on a lake. And then she told him the day he would die. And the man always said it didn't bother him to know when he would die, but it did. And every once in a while, he'd bring up the prophecy to his family. And then that day came, and it went, and the man still lived. He never brought up the topic again. He had dabbled with the occult and prophecy of that fortune teller, created a new low-grade fear in him that lasted for years. And it only stopped when the day that she said that he would die came and passed, and he was still alive. Then he wasn't afraid anymore, because it knew that she wasn't right about everything. Only God determines the time of life and death. These activities, visiting a fortune teller, consulting a medium, I know I actually know somebody, a friend of the family, but I haven't spoken to this person in over 20 years, but her daughter and I were friends when we were like 5 years old. And I guess my mom kept contact with her. And she once told me about 20 years ago that I should come visit with her to talk to her angel. And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, oh, we talked to an angel. She said, my daughter, the name is Carmel Ann, the daughter. She said, my daughter Carmel Ann is now very big. She has a chain of schools. She's doing real estate. She's making lots and tons of money because I get all the information from the angel. And I said, that's interesting. What's the angel's name? She said, I don't know. I said, well, if his name is Gabriel or Michael, give me a call. Because if it's hate, lies, death, then I'm definitely not interested. She said, no, aren't all angels from above? I said, not to my knowledge. In the Bible I read, the demons down there at one time were angels. They're fallen angels. That's why they're called demons. You know, it creates a bondage, a captivity. A prominent rabbi and teacher, about 10 years ago, he was pretty big in his field, kind of like the Tony Robbins of Judaism, you could say. And he was approached by a young couple who had who was having trouble with the youngest of 3 daughters. And the child had an eerie habit of screaming horrendously and then smiling in a deathly calm way. It was very disconcerting. Scream and then smile, but only when they entered the synagogue did this happen. And he said he wouldn't have believed it if he had not seen it himself, the rabbi said. And they approached him because they had heard him in one of his seminars and hoped that maybe he could help them. So he began to ask them some questions. Had either of them been involved with fortune telling in any way? And the wife related that before she was married, her mother had taken her to a restaurant where an old woman asked if her mother would like her daughter's fortune read for $1. Her mother, thinking it to be a lark, fished out $1 from her purse and let the old woman read tea leaves for her daughter. The fortune teller told the daughter that she would marry a tall man in uniform and that they would have 3 kids, all boys. Indeed, she fell in love with a tall man who was in the military. They married, and when she became pregnant, she thoroughly expected to give birth to a boy. But she was disappointed, not once, not twice, but 3 times. She had 3 girls, but she found herself particularly disappointed in the 3rd child. And so the rabbi explained that one of the dangers of fortune telling is that often 90% of it is right, but it's the 10% that Hasatan, the adversary, uses against us. Whether it is direct demonic influence or simply the result of personal disappointment, the tea reading had led to the odd behavior in this 3rd child. After they left the rabbi, they took the daughter home to her room and they closed the door. And they kneeled around the bed with their daughter. And they prayed over her, over their youngest daughter as she lay in the bed. And they asked forgiveness for the sins of the past. And they thanked God for giving them this beautiful child. And starting the very next day and from every day forward, the odd screaming and weird smile never came back again. You see, the appeal of the occult is in its supposed power to give us some control over our lives and the lives of those around us. I want to know the future. I want to know what's going to happen. But it is false, and it's a dangerous promise. And I want to note something here, because this is true. God never tells us to avoid these activities because they don't work. He doesn't say, don't go to soothsayers and spiritists and sorcerers and witches and fortune tellers because they're all wrong and false. He never says that. He never says that they won't yield some of what they promise. He simply says, don't do it. He says, you are my people and called to be holy and separate from that kind of wickedness. He says, don't touch it, don't accept it, and don't do it. Besides, why would God's people ever want or need such wickedness to be part of their lives when they are the people of the Most High God? We have so much more that our God has offered us. Romans 8, beginning in verse 31, tells us, what then shall we say in view of these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how shall he not also with him freely give us all things? Amen. Who shall bring a charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Who is the one who condemns? It is Messiah who died and moreover was raised and is now at the right hand of God, and who also intercedes for us. Amen. Yeshua also promises that with God all things are possible. Not with fortune tellers and not with witches, but only with God are all things possible. And so the next time that you're tempted by a sign on the sidewalk that says, psychic readings, $5, and you think, hey, why not? Then you're right back to not knowing which way is up. Because there is only one way up. There is only one way to heaven, only one way to Father, and that's through the Son, Yeshua, who was, and who is to come. Shabbat Shalom.